This is the last part of a two-part series of looking specifically for historical German influences found in cities along the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. I noticed a recurring pattern coming up in my research of consistently finding German entrepreneurs and settlements dating from the 19th century whenever I have researched cities situated along these two rivers. My name is Michelle Gibson. I will summarize and expand on my findings in both of these places about all of this after I take a look for the same kinds of things in the Ohio River Valley at the end of this video. The city of Cairo, Illinois, was located at the southernmost point in Illinois, at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. I say was because today Cairo is empty and deserted and considered a ghost town. In its heyday, Cairo was an important city along the steamboat routes and railway lines. Here's a comparison of the appearance of the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers on the top left, with the confluences of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers near St. Louis in the top middle, the Blue Nile and White Nile near Khartoum in the African country of Sudan on the top right, the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers near Des Moines, Iowa on the bottom left, and at the Six Rivers National Forest in Eureka, California on the bottom right. Is nature responsible for the striking similarities? Or are we looking at something else here? Fort Defiance was situated right where the two waterways come together. It has Illinois State Park status, and in lieu of an actual fort, it displays historic signage with no fort in sight. It was said to have been constructed under the direction of Union General Ulysses S. Grant in order to gain strategic access to the rivers. Southern Illinois, where Cairo is located, is known as Little Egypt. It is geographically near Thebes, Maconda, and Carbondale in Illinois, and is just down the Mississippi River from St. Louis, Missouri. Like Cairo, Thebes was said to have been named for the Egyptian city of the same name, and is perhaps best known for the Thebes Bridge, a 5-span cantilever truss railroad bridge said to have been built for the Union Pacific Railroad and opened for use in 1905. Construction of the Thebes Bridge was said to have started in 1902, and the bridge was said to have been designed by civil engineer Ralph Majeski, a preeminent bridge designer in the United States. The giant city-state park is in nearby Maconda, Illinois. The city of Maconda used the slogan Star of Egypt in the early 20th century. Maconda was once a major shipping hub for Chicago on the Illinois Central Railroad for fruits and vegetables. The city of Carbondale in Illinois, just a short distance north of Maconda, is the home of Southern Illinois University, and is in the crossing point of the paths of totality of both the 2017 and the 2024 solar eclipses. Were Egyptians, and Hebrews for that matter, in actual fact, already long established in America and not imported from somewhere else? Back to Cairo. In the 2010 census, there were 2,831 people listed as still living here, though most of the businesses are gone and its buildings in a state of decay. I am not finding references for historical German influences here, but that doesn't mean there weren't any, and as we continue along the Ohio River from here, I know the influences will be there from past research. One more thing before I leave abandoned Cairo for the next city along the river. The English novelist Charles Dickens visited Cairo, Illinois in 1842. Dickens created some of the world's best-known fictional characters and is regarded by many as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era. He was said not to have been impressed with Cairo, and that the nightmare city of Eden was based in Cairo in his novel Martin Chuzzlewit, which was published in serial form between 1842 and 1844. Martin Chuzzlewit is the story of the trials and adventures of a young architect of the same name, who ends up in America from England with traveling companion Mark Tapley to seek their fortunes. In New York, Martin purchased land, sight unseen, on a major American river, having been told that the place would need an architect for new building projects. When they arrived at Eden/Cairo, what they found instead was a swampy, disease-filled settlement, virtually empty of people and buildings, as previous settlers had died, and both Martin and Mark got ill from malaria while they were there. I have explored the idea in past videos that the literature and art of the 19th and 20th centuries were programming devices. Many of these authors were required reading in secondary school English classes, and many of their books were also turned into movies. I think famous authors like Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy, Jack London, Mark Twain, and John Steinbeck were giving shape and form to the new historical narrative in our collective minds. And was the old Cairo Custom House actually built between 1869 and 1872? Or did someone just stick a plaque on it telling us what to believe? The next place we come to is Paducah in Kentucky, at the confluence of the Ohio and Tennessee rivers. Once upon a time, it was the location of Fort Anderson, called a Union Army fortification built in 1861, the same year as Fort Defiance back in Cairo was said to have been built. Also like Fort Defiance, it no longer stands, and the only memory of its existence is historical marker 828 at the place where it once stood. Paducah was first incorporated in 1830, and its port facilities made it an important location for steamships and river commerce. The railroad arrived in Paducah in the 1850s, and it became an important railway hub for the Illinois Central Railroad, which connected major cities both north and south and east and west. German Jewish businessmen started arriving in Paducah in the 1840s, and then in greater numbers after the railroad came onto the scene. They dominated the local whiskey business as well. In 1890, Joseph Friedman and his brother-in-law John Cuyler started a distillery and wholesale whiskey business in 1890, with the distillery becoming one of the largest in the country. Another one who got his start in the whiskey business in Paducah was Isaac Wolf Bernheim, a German-born businessman who started the I.W. Harper brand of bourbon whiskey, along with his brother in Louisville, Kentucky. I found good examples of subliminal advertising in these ads for I.W. Harper whiskey, which is always a pleasure, and America's finest, associated with patriotic symbolism. Isaac W. Bernheim established the location for the Bernheim Arboretum and Research Forest south of Louisville in 1929 on land he was said to have purchased at the bargain basement price of $1 an acre because it had been strip mined for iron ore. When I was looking for photographs of the Bernheim Arboretum and Research Forest, I found these giant wooden trolls there that people seem to love to pose with. I myself find the imagery they evoke to be on the very disturbing side. Apparently they were made from recycled wood by Danish artist Thomas Dambo and have been on the ground since 2019. A few more things back in Paducah before I move on. Paducah has had major flooding 3 times, resulting in enormous amounts of property damage and loss of life in 1884, 1913, and 1937. Here is one photo of the 1884 Paducah flood, and another that I found that is one of those creepy staged-looking photographs with the words "stage of water" even mentioned on this one that I find from time to time, like the ones that I found in Nelson County, Virginia, on the Orange and Alexandria Bridge. This one taken in Trenton, New Jersey, sometime in the 1870s. And this one was taken in front of the Machinery Hall in Cincinnati at the 1888 Centennial Exposition of the Ohio Valley and Central States. The American-German National Bank of Paducah printed currency between 1872 and 1910, though they didn't make that distinction on the actual currency notes. Lastly, 20 blocks of Paducah's downtown have been designated as a historic district and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The next stop on the Ohio River is Evansville, the largest city in southern Indiana and a hub for everything in the region, as well as the seat of Vanderburgh County. This is the old Vanderburgh County Courthouse, said to have been built between 1888 and 1890. The city of Evansville was said to have been founded in 1812 and incorporated in 1817. It is interesting to note that Evansville was founded around the same time as the New Madrid earthquakes. Evansville is not geographically distant from New Madrid, Missouri, being only 144 miles or 232 kilometers apart from each other. New Madrid is best known for the New Madrid earthquakes, 3 of which in the winter of 1811 and 1812 were estimated to be the largest earthquakes ever recorded in the United States, that the USGS estimated were between 7 and 8 on the Richter scale, and which created widespread devastation through the region. The Wabash and Erie Canal was said to have been built starting in 1832, and its construction completed by 1853 between Toledo, Ohio, and Evansville. But we are told the canal was already made obsolete with the opening of the Evansville and Crawfordsville Railroad to Terre Haute that same year, and only 2 flat barges made the entire trip. Lumber baron John Augustus Reitz immigrated from Germany to America to seek his fortune at the age of 21 in 1863. He eventually found work in a sawmill in Evansville, and in 1856 opened his own sawmill with his sons on Pigeon Creek, and became one of the largest in the area. Evansville was the largest hardwood market in the country from 1845 to 1888. Besides the lumber industry, Reitz was involved in banking and the railroad as well, organizing the Crescent City Bank and incorporating the Evansville, Carmi, and Paducah Railroad, which later became the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. So John A. Reitz was a very busy and wealthy man. The Reitz home in Evansville is now a Victorian house museum and considered to be one of the finest examples of the French Second Empire style architecture. He was said to have built the house in 1871 with things like hand-painted ceilings, intricately patterned, hand-laid wood parquet floors, stained glass windows, and French gilt chandeliers. John A. Reitz was said to have been a devout Roman Catholic in the biographical references I looked at, but I wanted to see if there was a possibility he was actually Jewish. Well, I found there was a possibility when I looked up the origin of the family name. Known for his philanthropic activities, John A. Reitz was said to have been a big contributor to the construction and maintenance of Evans Hall, a building solely dedicated to temperance. The temperance movement was called a social movement against the consumption of alcohol, and typically criticized alcohol consumption and emphasized alcohol's negative effects on people's health, personalities, and lives, in many cases demanding the complete prohibition of it. Interesting that there would be a building dedicated to temperance in a community with a robust beer-making industry. Apparently, by the year of 1862, there were 16 breweries already, and the first one to have been set up was taken over by brewmaster John Hartmutz in 1877. It eventually became a large regional brewery with a national reputation for quality with regards to its famous Sterling beer brand. There was a good-sized German Jewish presence in Evansville from its beginnings as well. Not only was there an alcohol industry in Evansville, there was also a cigar industry. The Fendrick Cigar Company became the largest independent cigar factory in the world, at its peak producing 100 million cigars each year. The Fendrick brothers immigrated first to Baltimore in America in 1833 from a part of Germany with a history of cigar making. They started in the tobacco and cigar business in the 1840s, and in 1855 moved their company headquarters to Evansville. There were a number of big fires in Evansville's history. The Main Street Fire of January 3rd of 1951 blazed through the city's central retail hub, destroying almost all of the Main Street landmarks, some of which are shown here in a photograph that was taken a few weeks before the fire. Before I leave Evansville, I want to take a look at Angel Mounds. The site was named after the Angel family who purchased the farmland they are on, starting in 1852. This sounds just like the magnificent mound-building civilization of North America, being named the Hopewell culture in 1891, after the family who owned the land that the Hopewell Mound Group earthworks were located in Ross County, Ohio, and not having any connection made in the name with the indigenous people of this continent. The Angel Mounds site included 6 large platform mounds, 5 small mounds, at least 1 large plaza, and palisaded walls. The mound builders are typically depicted like this, wearing loincloths and living in thatched huts. I counted 21 cities on my map of the Ohio River Valley at the beginning of this video, so I'm going to hit the highlights from just a few more of the cities, as there is so much more to find here, it would take me forever to finish this. Then I will summarize and expand on my findings in Part 1 and Part 2 at the end. Next, I'm going to look at the Louisville, Kentucky area on the border with the state of Indiana. Founded in 1778 on the Ohio River, Louisville is one of the oldest cities west of the Appalachians, and the settlement was said to have grown as a portage site for Ohio River traffic because of the Falls of the Ohio, the only obstruction for river traffic between the upper Ohio River and the Gulf of Mexico. The Falls of the Ohio were also where Lewis and his crew met up with Clark at what is now Clarkville, Indiana, in October of 1803, across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. After a keelboat for their expedition was said to have been built to Lewis's specifications near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1803. The earliest settlements around the Falls of the Ohio are shown here. Louisville was the destination of the first German immigrants starting around 200 years ago, and by 1850 they represented nearly 20% of the population, said to have influenced every aspect of daily life, from politics to art. The Moses and Henry Levy brothers immigrated to America from Germany in 1853 and opened their first Levy's department store in 1861, and then moved to their flagship store after it was said to have been constructed between 1888 and 1893 by prominent Louisville architects Arthur Loomis and Charles Julian Clark. The Levy Brothers building still stands today and is on the National Register of Historic Places. It was renovated to have a restaurant on the first 2 floors and apartment units above the restaurant. Kunz's the Dutchman restaurant started out as a wholesale liquor business in 1892 and was a restaurant between 1941 and 1966. Alcohol that is 100 proof is 50% alcohol by volume and straight up flammable. Alcohol is classified as a depressant because it slows down the central nervous system, causing a decrease in motor coordination, reaction time, and cognitive function, and high doses cause the respiratory system to slow down drastically, potentially causing a coma or death. Founded in 1797 as Brunerstown, by 1870, 17% of the citizenry of Jeffersonville, Indiana, across the river from Louisville, were foreign-born, mostly from Germany. This is the German-American Bank location in Jeffersonville today. The Butcherville neighborhood was so named because it became the area for butchers and stockyards in Louisville because of its proximity to the Beargrass Creek, where animal remains were said to have been dumped. The Bourbon stockyards were built in 1836, we are told, and waves of German immigrants found their way to Butchertown. These stockyards closed in 1996 after untold millions of animals were led to slaughter here. The most prominent of the German meat packers was Henry Fisher, whose Fisher Packing Company still exists today. The Germantown neighborhood in Louisville was predominantly settled by Germans in the mid-1800s as well. The next place is Cincinnati, located on the northern side of the confluence of the Ohio and Licking rivers, the latter of which marks the state line with Kentucky. And it is the seat of Hamilton County, with construction of the present courthouse said to have been completed in 1915, which would have been during the First World War. Cincinnati was booming in the 19th century, when during the 1800s it was listed among the top 10 cities for its population. During that time, a significant number of German immigrants arrived in Cincinnati. Mass immigration began in the 1830s with Cincinnati's boom in the meatpacking and shipping industries. Ohio farmers brought their livestock to Cincinnati for processing and shipment to various markets. Meatpacking resulted in tremendous wealth for some, while at the same time workers received little pay for working long hours without benefits and if they couldn't keep up the pace, they were simply replaced. Upton Sinclair published the book The Jungle in 1906, which was about the harsh conditions and exploited lives of immigrants in Chicago, depicting the working-class poverty, lack of social supports, harsh living and working conditions, health violations, and unsanitary practices, and the deeply rooted corruption of people in power. While the book's publication and public outcry surrounding it led to reforms in the meatpacking industry, like the Meat Inspection Act, Upton Sinclair was a socialist, and promoting socialism was another purpose of the book. Political refugees came to Cincinnati after the 1848 revolution in the German states. The revolutions had the aim of removing the old monarchical structures and creating independent nation-states, and was the most widespread revolutionary wave in Europe's history, with approximately 50 countries being affected. The most important of these were in the Habsburg Empire and the states of the German Confederation that would make up the German Empire in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as well as in France, the Netherlands, and Italy. Between 1840 and 1850, the German population increased almost 10 times, and 30% of Cincinnati's population was of German stock by 1860. It is important to note Cincinnati has the oldest Jewish community west of the Allegheny Mountains. In 1854, Isaac Mayer Wise became the rabbi of the B'nai Yeshurun congregation in Cincinnati and a leader in establishing what became known as American Reform Judaism. Formerly the Plum Street Temple, the Isaac M. Wise Temple was said to have been erected in a Byzantine Moorish synagogue architectural style that originated in Germany during the 19th century for his congregation in 1865, and that it was dedicated in 1866. Among the oldest synagogue buildings still standing in the United States, and the historical narrative we are given, the year it was built in 1865 was the last year of the Civil War. Rabbi Isaac M. Wise's brother-in-law, a publisher named Edward Block, followed him to Cincinnati in 1854, and he helped set up the production side of the oldest Jewish American newspaper in America, The Israelite, which was first published in 1854. Edward Block then went on to found the Block Publishing Company in Cincinnati, at the time the largest Jewish publisher in the country. His son Charles moved the headquarters of the company to New York City in 1901. Cincinnati's Over-the-Rhine neighborhood is among the most intact and largest historic districts in the United States. The name of the neighborhood was said to have come from the mostly German immigrants who developed the area in the mid-1800s. Amongst the districts within the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood is the Brewery District, the heart of Cincinnati's beer brewing industry. It was here that the first German-owned brewery was opened in 1829. By 1860, there were as many as 36 breweries operating in Cincinnati, and by 1889, there were 13 fewer breweries, but they were shipping beer the world over. And by 1890, Cincinnati was named the beer capital of the world. Some of the members of Cincinnati's Beer Barons Hall of Fame include John Kaufman, who established the Kaufman Brewery in 1844, Friedrich and Heinrich Schmidt, who in 1852 founded the Schmidt Brothers Brewery, first as the St. Louis Brewery, and Christian Moerlein, who established his first brewing company there in 1853, the city's largest brewery, developing into a national and international market. From Cincinnati, I'm going to end in Pittsburgh and show you several of the cities along the way there, without going into detail, like Maysville, seat of Mason County in Kentucky, Huntingdon, the seat of Cabell County in West Virginia, Steubenville, the seat of Jefferson County in Ohio, and East Liverpool in Columbiana County in Ohio, once called the pottery capital of the United States. I'm going to end my journey at Pittsburgh, the largest city in the Ohio River Valley. This is a view of the forks of the Ohio at present-day Pittsburgh, which, like Fort Defiance back in Cairo, Illinois, at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, has a star fort presence, in this case Fort Duquesne and Fort Pitt, where the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers join to form the Ohio River. During the mid-19th century, Pittsburgh received a dramatic influx of German immigrants, including the parents of Henry John Heinz, the founder of the condiment manufacturing H.J. Heinz Company. By the time of his death in 1919, the H.J. Heinz Company owned over 20 food processing plants, as well as seed farms and container factories. Heinz merged with Kraft in 2015 to become the world's fifth largest food and beverage company. At least one biographical reference I found said H.J. Heinz's parents were Lutheran, and he was raised Lutheran. But like with John A. Wright's back in Evansville, Heinz is also listed as an Ashkenazic Jewish family name. The Pittsburgh Jewish community started forming in 1838 and is known in the broader American Reform Jewish community for the 1885 Pittsburgh Platform that called for Jews to adopt a modern approach to the practice of their faith, though it was never formally adopted by the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. It contained 8 principles, one of which was the recommendation to do away with rabbinical laws that regulate diet, priestly purity, and dress. 2 other of the principles of the Pittsburgh Platform I would like to bring forward mention Palestine by name. One states, "We recognize in the Mosaic legislation a system of training the Jewish people for its mission during its national life in Palestine, and today we accept as binding only its moral laws and maintain only such ceremonies as elevate and sanctify our lives, but reject all such as are not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization." The other states, "We recognize in the modern era of universal culture of heart and intellect the approaching of the realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of the kingdom of truth, justice, and peace among all men. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state." These 2 principles establish the notion of the physical homeland of Palestine, presumably in the Middle East, as having been the ancestral homeland of the Jews, but at that time they considered themselves a religious community with no expectation of returning to Palestine. 12 years after the promulgation of the 8 principles of the Pittsburgh Platform, the First World Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland in 1897, which was convened by Theodor Herzl for the small minority of Jewry in agreement with the implementation of the Zionist goals. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued in November of 1917 addressed to Lord Rothschild, the leader of the British Jewish community, from the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people. The Central Conference of American Rabbis, or CCAR, declaration in its 1937 Columbus Platform of an affirmation of the obligation of all Jewry to aid in Palestine's upbuilding as a Jewish homeland, and its assertion in the 1976 Centenary Perspective that we are bound to the newly born state of Israel by innumerable religious and ethnic ties, was accepted by the CCAR in the Miami Platform of 1997. Let's talk about Zionism now, because the Mormons are Zionists as well, and actually say there was civilization of Israelites in the Americas. Among other things, in Mormonism, Zion is a metaphor for a unified society of Latter-day Saints, metaphorically gathered as members of the Church of Christ, and in this sense, any stake of the Church may be referred to as a stake of Zion. A stake is the name given to administrative units composed of multiple congregations in certain denominations of the Church, like the Palestine Stake of Zion in Palestine, Illinois. There is a city named Palestine in Illinois. It must have been named after the Palestine in the Middle East, right? Or is it? Could there actually have been a place or region called Palestine in America as well? Then there was what Joseph Smith said, the founder of Mormonism and the Latter-day Saint movement. He believed that the entirety of the Americas was Zion, and that the American tribes were descended from the Hebrew tribes of Israel. Was the founding of the Mormon Church what is defined as controlled opposition? Controlled opposition is a strategy in which an individual, organization, or movement is covertly controlled or influenced by a third party, and the controlled entity's true purpose is something other than its publicly stated purpose. The controlled entity serves a role of mass deception, surveillance, or political and social manipulation. The controlled party is portrayed as being in opposition to the interests of the controlling party. It sure looks to me like the early Mormon leaders were also involved in the creation of the new civilization and narrative, as well as the Catholic orders like the Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries, the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, and the royal houses of Europe. And their secret activities involved with the creation of the New World Order were carried out with the involvement of the highest echelons of secret societies, including the Freemasons, Oddfellows, Knights of Pythias, and the Skull and Bones Society. The definition of Zionism is an international movement originally for the establishment of a Jewish national or religious community in Palestine, and later for the support of modern Israel. I think Zionism is the vehicle by which the world's controllers, known by names such as the Illuminati, Cabal, Globalist Elite, and Bilderbergers, that planned and executed the corporate structure for their global takeover of the world's finances, resources, and people. They are a small number of related elitist families hidden in different nationalities and religions to carry out their plans for world domination. What was the origin of their Zionist template? This is the King James Version of Psalm 76, verses 1 and 2. In Judah is God known, his name is great in Israel. In Salem also is his tabernacle, and his dwelling place in Zion. The word Salem, or Shalom in Hebrew, means peace, which the similar sounding word Salam in Arabic also means. A tabernacle was a portable sanctuary in the wilderness, and the earthly dwelling place of God. On the surface, we are told that Sion, with an S, is the Greek form of Zion with a Z, and denotes Mount Hermon in Deuteronomy 4, verse 48, where Mount Hermon is referred to as Mount Sirion, and a hill where King David captured a stronghold. A temple was later built, and later became synonymous with Jerusalem. I also found a definition of Zion as an imaginary place considered to be perfect or ideal. The metaphysical meaning of Zion is defined thus, with words describing things like high power, virtue, courage, and strength. So what if the King James Version of Psalm 76, verse 2, of God's tabernacle is in Salem, and his dwelling place in Zion, actually means something to the effect of God's portable sanctuary is in peace, and his dwelling place in the highest ideals, which could also be applied to each individual human being as a portable sanctuary of peace, striving to live life in the highest manner possible. The word Zion, instead, has come to be associated as a place name for Jerusalem, as well as the Jewish homeland, and is not synonymous with Sion, which is a state of being the people of the original civilization strove for. What if the 12 tribes of Israel were not from a specific location on the earth, but an integral part of how the original worldwide civilization was laid out? The following is a summary of some of my findings regarding the creation of the world we live in today, by focusing my research primarily on German entrepreneurs and settlements in the Mississippi River and Ohio River valleys. German Jewish immigrants started arriving around 1830 in cities all along these important waterways, setting up shop and monetizing all available resources through the creation of different industry sectors, creating the new economy and financial system, and generally laying the groundwork for the new world on top of the original infrastructure of the ancient Moorish civilization that built everything, which had its origins in Mu, also known as Lemuria. In my opinion, the infrastructure was dug out of mudflows and/or restarted in order to be able to use whatever form of infrastructure it was, like canals, railroads, and streetcars, among many other things, and not built by the people who took credit for building them. These businessmen created jobs for which they paid immigrants, not only from Germany but other countries as well, low wages, which was in turn returned as wealth in the form of payment for goods purchased in their department stores and other shops, among many other ways of increasing wealth by payment. It is also an interesting side note that child labor laws didn't go into effect in the United States until 1938. creating an environment filled with the widespread availability of addictive substances, which was then glamorized in glitzy advertisements. Beautiful old buildings were either intentionally modified, demolished, or left abandoned to deteriorate on their own over time. Following the Mississippi River, I found the origins of the Monsanto Chemical Company in St. Louis, from which its very first product, saccharin, was manufactured by the company founder for the Meyer Brothers Drug Company in the same city, and the start of a whole host of poisonous products. Monsanto was acquired by the German multinational Bayer Pharmaceuticals and Life Sciences Company after gaining United States and EU regulatory approvals on June 7th of 2018, and Monsanto's name is no longer used. I found this picture of a cotton field in New Madrid County, the second leading producer of cotton in Missouri, with signage displaying the Bayer logo. I found Joseph Biedenharn, originating in Vicksburg, Mississippi, a German-American businessman who was the first bottler of Coca-Cola and the first to develop an independent network of franchise bottlers to distribute the drink. He moved his Coke bottling business to Monroe, Louisiana in 1913, and he, along with his son and other investors, bought a crop dusting business in 1925 for spraying pesticides, which were other product lines of Monsanto, and which was the genesis of Delta Airlines, which was incorporated in 1928. And lastly, in following the Ohio River, I found the origins of American Reform Judaism, which connects directly back to the formation of the Zionist movement as we know it in the 20th century in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. In conclusion, the same people that don't want you to believe Henry Kissinger ever said this at the World Health Organization Council on Eugenics on February 5th of 2009 want you to believe that the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, first published in Russia in 1903, describing a Jewish plan for global domination, was an anti-Semitic forgery. I want to end this video by saying I personally believe the world's elitist controllers will not get away with all that they have done, and that things are in motion to bring about their day of reckoning in the near future.